Someone once told you that you could not do it. A parent or teacher said those words, and you've lived inside them ever since. The thing stopping you is no longer a physical reality. It is a memory masquerading as a current truth, tricking your brain into processing a past event as an active, immovable obstacle. A young monk named Fia lived with this hesitation deep in her bones. Every time she faced a new task, she calculated her failure before her hands even moved. Not because she lacked the skill, but because she was still responding to a command from her past. When we adopt someone else's definition of our limits, we build a boundary that exists only because we have stopped testing it. Fia's history was a series of shutdowns. At 7, her mother stopped her from singing at a village gathering. When she tried to weave, her mother took the thread, calling her clumsy. When she asked for school, she was told education wasn't for girls like her. Each of these rejections served as a data point that lowered Fia's baseline for risk-taking. Over time, she learned to anticipate the correction before it happened, effectively training her mind to avoid the pain of a no by never attempting a yes. Eventually, the external voice of the mother was absorbed entirely. It became an automatic, internal monologue that spoke with Fia's own voice, making the criticism feel like a personal realization rather than an inherited one. Once a critic is internalized, the original oppressor is no longer necessary. We become our own jailers, staying within the lines long after they leave. At the monastery, Fia entered an environment that treated failure as a neutral, inevitable part of the learning cycle. She watched a student drop a clay bowl he had spent an entire week molding. He didn't spiral or quit. He simply swept up the shards and began again the next morning. Fia viewed this through the lens of false equivalence. False equivalence is a cognitive bias where two unequal things are treated as identical. In her mind, dropping the bowl wasn't a mistake. It was a total invalidation of her right to be a potter. When we treat minor errors as fatal anomalies, we guarantee our own permanent inaction. One afternoon, the old master took Fia to a large bird cage. Most of the birds inside were highly active, rapidly beating their wings and flying from perch to perch. But one bird sat motionless on the floor. Its wings were tucked tight against its body, making no effort to join the others in the air. This bird had arrived with clipped wings. A previous owner had physically severed its flight feathers, so every time it tried to fly in the past, it fell. The failure was a real physical consequence of its environment. This chart tracks flight capability. The injury was real, but feathers regrew, restoring biological wings to 100%. Yet, the bird remains grounded by learned helplessness, a state where past failure makes effort seem futile. The flat red line reveals this stagnant belief. Physical healing is functionally useless if the mind is still running on a traumatic, outdated version of reality. The master showed Fia how her mother's words acted as the scissors for her own life. Every "you are clumsy" or "you cannot" was a physical clipping of her potential. He acknowledged that her past failures were based on a real dataset. When she tried to fly under her mother's roof, she hit the ground. That cane was a factual part of her history. But years have passed, and Fia has grown. Her capabilities have evolved, yet she remains grounded by a memory that no longer reflects her current stats or her current environment. The mother, the words, and the original failures are crumbling pillars of a past timeline. They no longer exist in the present. The only structural barrier remaining is the glowing node of the belief itself. A belief is a thought, not a law of physics. It loses its power the moment we choose to look at our current wings instead of our past injuries. Fia watched the bird on the floor for a long time, recognizing the tragic gap between its full feathers and its refusal to move. The next morning, she asked for a new task. When the internal voice arrived to warn her of failure, she didn't argue with it. She simply checked the state of her own wings and chose to act based on her current readiness. Take a look at the limitations you still carry. Recognize that while the memory of being clipped is real, the feathers have already grown back. You are no longer the person who failed all those years ago.